Okay, so this video is going to be a bit different from normal, but I think you're really going to like it. Basically, I had to make a documentary analysis video for my documentary production class in college, and I really liked how the end result turned out, so I thought I would just share it on YouTube so you all can see it and maybe get some advice from it as well. So anyway, enjoy this video essay-like documentary analysis. So this is Stone Locals, a 2020 climbing film produced by Patagonia and directed by Mikey Schaefer and Cheyenne Lembe. On its surface, this may sound like a stereotypical climbing film such as Free Solo, which usually focuses on a big climbing objective overcome by a single person or a few people. But this documentary is not like that at all. This film simply uses climbing as a powerful connecting attribute between the deeply personal experiences of 5 different people, and in doing so, Stone Locals is a phenomenal example of a multiple character and multiple story documentary, something that is very difficult to accomplish. Structure is always a fundamental piece of documentary filmmaking, but Stone Locals takes it a step further. Let's break it down. We start the film with a simple question: what would your life be without climbing?
Oh man, that's a hard question.
This common question, asked in all the interviews, is the perfect way to introduce our characters. We get to see and hear all 5 of them within the first few minutes, and we can instantly grasp their love and connection with climbing.
You couldn't get me to stop climbing. The thing that kept pulling me back in every single time was just the freedom of it all.
This hook carries us into an introduction of the film and the titles, and then the story really gets started. This is where the structure becomes overwhelmingly important. I've laid it out here so it can make more visual sense, but basically we have an Act 1, which is the introduction, we have an Act 2, which is the character development phase, Act 3, which is the dark and emotional part, and then Act 4, which is uplifting and a conclusion. So let's first jump into Act 1. Because we are following 5 different people in 5 different locations, we must first establish their positions. Each of them get about a 4-minute segment where we learn where they live, what they do for work, and what climbing means for them. First is Danielle Pohl in Herdecke, Germany. Second is the Keithley family in Salt Lake City. Third is Dario Ventura in Red River Gorge, Kentucky. Fourth is Kathy Carlo in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And fifth is Katsutaka Yokoyama in Yamanashi, Japan. So now it should become pretty obvious why structure is so important in this film. There's a lot of different people in a lot of different locations doing a lot of different things. So if you didn't understand that and if the structure wasn't formatted well, it would get very confusing very quickly.
I go in, I make no fire!
Everything is connected to climbing in my life. Without climbing, we don't exist.
Act 2 is where the story really begins. The same order of stories is kept for Act 2 to ensure that the audience doesn't get confused, and this is a very effective way in making sure that that structure is sound. Now we dive deeper into each of these people's lives and we learn why they do what they do. For one example, Kathy explains that she runs a podcast which is intended to diversify climbing.
I produce a podcast called For the Love of Climbing. It's not a climbing podcast. It's people's personal stories seen through the lens of climbing, but it's about so much more.
And Dario talks about the history of his family's pizza shop.
He's the backbone of the business.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are. So many people go into business and they like draw up business plans. You have all these people that think how a business is run and they got it all like sussed out. This has all just been holding on for the ride and figuring out as we go.
Climber said, "Can you make us something to eat?" And my wife said, "I think I've made pizza before. Let's try that." So we did. I knew how to bake bread, so we started making pizza, and that's how it started. I mean, it was nothing.
Act 3 is where the emotional drama begins. Each character is in their deepest and darkest hour, the point of no return. It should also be noted that Act 3 goes away from that original structure of having people in a specific order and mixes people around more because now we know who they are, so we don't need to keep that same structure. As an audience, you start to understand that each of these people don't just love climbing, but they've all been through something significant that has affected their life in usually a negative or harmful way. Daniel has been in a bunch of psychiatric hospitals and has had many friends die from climbing.
They put me for 7 years into psychiatry. They put me into these darkest rooms of Germany. You can't leave this type of psychiatry, this darkest hole.
The Keithley family suffers from mental illness.
Through life, and through those low times, climbing was like there for me.
Dario's daughter nearly died from a liver disease.
She like flatlined 3 times. Like it was like really sketchy. The community support for like our daughter was mind-blowing. Climbers bought us food at the hospital the entire time, and it was a different set of climbers every day for like months.
Kathy was a victim of sexual assault.
And because of that, I have spent the last year of my life trying to unpack it and running away.
And Katsutaka has had many friends die in the mountains, and he worries about balancing his love of the sport and caring for his family.
周りでいろんな人が死んでいった。山に対する恐怖だとか、自分はここで死にたくないみたいなような恐怖プラス責任感みたいなもんですかね。どんどん大きくなって。
Capping off Act 3, we have this shot.
And when you run out of hope, you either have to dig really deep or you don't, you know?
This is a shot that easily could have been cut short. But no, the filmmakers want you to feel uncomfortable, to feel the tension and the emotion. And right as it begins to feel too long,
So I dug deep.
the music builds and drives us into our final act. Like you would expect, Act 4, or the final act, concludes much of the story.
You know, all these things I'm doing, it's therapy. Don't think about the bad. Just take a new path.
I think climbing has provided a lot of guidance, allowing me to open up or feel okay being different. At a young age, you're not taught, you're not given any healthy ways of coping, you know?
Each character has a chance to really answer that initial question of what climbing means to them, and as an audience, we feel an emotional relief in the way each character has managed to cope with their challenges.
出会ったからこそ今の自分があるっていうのは本当に強く思います。今の家族と一緒にここで暮らせるというのはやっぱりクライミングというものがあったから。垣間見ることができて。
If you're a very serious climber, that's great, but also think about the ways that you can give back.
I've grown up in this community and I've been part of it my whole life, and it was like the one time when I really needed it, and people just like, it was insane. So many people were there for us. At like the hardest time of my life, people just stood up and were like, hey, Dario's daughter is sick, let's help him out.
And so I'm quite proud now that I may be seen like an artist, not like an ill person. And I can be here like a human being.
So as you could see, the story structure isn't exactly revolutionary. In fact, it follows a very traditional arc, but it's the way of establishing characters, pacing, and connecting between different stories that makes it a very powerful example for documentary structure. Let's just take a moment to appreciate the cinematography and colors of this film, because it is seriously beautiful. The natural-looking grade with the stunning scenery and flowing camera movements make this film very stylistic and visually pleasing to watch. The editing of this piece is pretty simple, but it flows incredibly nicely. There are slow, dialogue-heavy sequences that tell the story in words, and then quick, visually stunning sequences that enforce that same story. The shot layout is also quite simple but effective. It's mostly A-roll interviews with B-roll overlaid, but in Daniel's story, for example, there is animation to show his artwork. In Dario's story, there is some archival footage. In Kathy's story, there is some animation, and in Katsutaka's story, there is some more archival footage. Okay, so this film is sponsored by Patagonia. There's no question about it. It's a production of a clothing company, it's published on their YouTube channel, it has their logo at the beginning and the end of the film, and it may feature some of their clothing in places, but it in no way feels like a corporate influence on the film. If you've ever seen any other Patagonia produced films, such as Artificial or Damnation, which I highly recommend you do, but you will know that Patagonia never has a large influence on their films. They simply fund projects that they believe in and mostly stand back. So although the name brand may result in some people looking at their products, well, they're a great company, so I don't really see that as a negative. Obviously, this film tackles some deeply personal and emotional stories, so there's a slight concern for the ethics of this piece. However, I think that each of the characters knew what they would be discussing before being interviewed, and I think the filmmakers did a great job of listening to the stories and telling them as told. I actually found a great article on the Climbing Magazine website that has a conversation with the director of Stone Locals, and he describes the processes they used for this film. For example, he says, "From the onset of the project, we knew that getting the right subjects was going to make or break the film, so we spent almost 2 months searching and researching." He then says, "We probably had close to 50 potential subjects on the list to start and then slowly whittled it down to 10 or so. Once we had 10 people, we started conducting phone interviews to get more of an idea of how they participated in the climbing community." And then he goes on to say, "Though we did conduct phone interviews and had an idea of whom our subjects were, we didn't really know their stories until we started filming with them. We were just there to listen, watch, and capture their life and how climbing has impacted it." So based on the film and this article, I would say that the ethical concerns are close to nothing. The same ties into the credibility of the film. There is a concern that the filmmakers could edit the movie to tell a different story, but I think they did a good job staying away from the personal stories and not over-dramatizing anything. Since there are no quote-unquote experts in this film, all of the story is based on the sole perspective of the characters, so we must take their stories for granted, and I believe they all feel very genuine and credible. So I really think watching this film in its entirety is the only way to truly grasp how wonderful it is. And trust me, this analysis barely spoiled any of the film. There is so much more. The filmmakers of this film definitely took a risk delving away from the traditional climbing film style, but I believe because of the research, structure, and cinematography, this is a documentary that anyone can enjoy regardless of their familiarity with climbing. It's just a truly heartwarming story. So anyway, I know that was quite different from my normal videos, but hopefully you learned a thing or two. I know I definitely did in analyzing that documentary, learned some new tips and techniques that I can utilize in future projects. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.